A long time ago, the relationship between daughter-in-law and mother-in-law was a true field of tensions, cold and misunderstanding looks that seemed to have no end. Until suddenly, as a magic pass, everything has changed. What caused this radical transformation? An unexpected heritage, a 3-bedroom apartment, right in the heart of the city, which fell on the young woman's lap. Over the day, the mother-in-law began to show affection and attention that bordered the exaggeration. The daughter-in-law, perplexed with so much change, could not resist and let out the question that did not want to silence. After all, why does this love all suddenly? Is your true affection measures in square meters? Good night, dear listeners. Here is Andre Branco, and it is with great pleasure that I receive them once again on The Family Ties. Today, I have prepared for you a story that will make you rethink how far interest can mask true feelings. They accommodate, because this narrative is one that mark. Exactly 6 months ago, Kira Mota said goodbye to her grandmother, Rosa Divino, in a grey cemetery under a heavy sky. The elderly woman, who lived 92 years full of stories, spent the last 15 alone in that spacious apartment in the city centre, a real oasis amid urban chaos. Kira was the only one who didn't abandon her. Every week, without failing, she appeared with bags of groceries, medicines, or simply to hear the endless reports of a youth that seemed out of a novel. Meanwhile, her husband, Daniel Mota, wrinkled his nose whenever the subject came to light. For him, those visits were a waste of time, a burden that took the brightness of its weekends. Already the mother-in-law, Elvira Rangel, did not even bother to disdain the disdain. Director of a children's school, accustomed to giving orders and seeing them fulfilled, she did not lose the chance to criticize her daughter-in-law. According to her, Kira, who worked as a freelance translator, should get a fixed job, build a real career instead of staying home hitting a key. But at the same time, it required her daughter-in-law to be always available to take care of her grandson, prepare impeccable Sunday lunches and keep the house shine as if it were possible to reconcile it all with an 8-hour job. On the funeral day, the absence of the family was a decturing. Elvira claimed a sudden allergy to pollution in the middle of November, when the flowers didn't even exist. Daniel, in turn, invented as convenient as suspiciously a stomach pain. Kira buried her grandmother almost alone, accompanied only by a few neighbors and a distant cousin that came from Belo Horizonte. Then came the bureaucratic procedures. The notary explained, in 6 months, the 3-bedroom apartment, valued at about 20 million reais, would be officially hers. Until then, neither Daniel nor Elvira had shown the slightest interest in the property. On the contrary, the mother-in-law had even released mockery that old mansion should be sold to buy something smaller but modern in a new condominium. The next 6 months went as always. Elvira continued to criticize every decision of Kira, from the way she educated her son to the choice of spices in food. Daniel, as always, agreed with his mother and avoided any serious conversation. When Kira suggested using her economies for a beach trip, her husband wrinkled his nose. "I spend unnecessary." The mother-in-law added, with air of superiority, "Better keep it for something useful, like a car." But everything changed in May, when Kira finally signed the papers and the apartment became yours and only yours. It was then that the show started. A week later, Elvira called, with a morose voice that Kira had never heard. "Honey, we need to talk. How about a coffee, just the two of us?" In 5 years of marriage, the mother-in-law had never called her dear, much less paid for a coffee. The meeting was surreal. Elvira, who had always condemned freshness, as dear candy, he asked the most sophisticated cakes on the menu and spent the next time praising Kira as if it were the most extraordinary woman on the planet. "You're so smart, so dedicated, so good mother. Daniel is very lucky to have you." Kira listened to it all gaping, remembering that a week before, that same woman had accused her of neglecting the cleansing of the curtains. The next day, Daniel came home with a bouquet of red roses, just because yes. He said he missed her, that he wanted to spend more time together. And, amazingly, he suggested that trip to the beach he had previously called extravagance. Signs of affection only increased. Elvira started to call daily to know how Kira was. Daniel began to help with housework without having to be remembered. The mother-in-law even presented her daughter-in-law with a luxury cream, saying she deserved the best. But the apex of comedy came when it came to such an inheritance. In the beginning, they were just innuendo. Elvira commented, as who wants nothing, that the family was tight in the kitchenette. Daniel complained that his son needed one room of him. The mother-in-law dreamed aloud with the comfort of a spacious house in the center, where everything is close. Soon, however, the suggestions were explicit. "Why don't we think of moving?" Elvira asked with a calculated smile. "That apartment is empty, and we here, squeezed." Daniel supported his mother, arguing that a larger space would be ideal for raising the boy. Kira watched everything in silence, curious to see how far they would. It was not long before Elvira draws grandiose plans. They would sell the small apartment, would use the money to reform that of the inheritance, with suite master suite, gourmet kitchen, 2 bathrooms, and of course a room for the grandmother, that is, herself. "At my age, you can't live alone," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Daniel, euphoric, had already seen owners of a prestigious address. "I told friends about the new phase of the family, chic dinners imagined in the living room." Kira, in the meantime, represented her role as a submissive wife. He agreed, smiled, even visited a furniture store to plan the renovation. But inside, a certainty grew. She finally saw the mask those two wore. The climax came at a special dinner at Elvira's house. The table was set carefully, and even a neighbor was invited to witness that historical moment. Between one dish and another, the mother-in-law lifted the cup and stated, with an emotionally voice, "Kira, you are the daughter-in-law I always dreamed, the perfect wife for my son and an exemplary mother." The neighbor, confused, asked, "But wasn't it like that before?" Elvira laughed, like a joke. "Oh, I always loved her. I just didn't know how to show. Now that she has become so independent and successful, I can show my affection without shame." Daniel, not wanting to stay behind, added, "My wife is a jewel. And soon we will have a beautiful house for our united family." That's when Kira dropped the fork. He looked into Elvira's eyes and let out, with a sharp calm, "Say one thing. This love is for me, or my square meters." The silence that followed was so dense that you could cut with a knife. Elvira blistered, stunned. Daniel tried to babble something, but the words died in his throat. The mask had fallen. And this time, there was no return. Daniel tried to intervene, but Elvira stopped him with a sudden gesture. 5 years of contempt did not go out with a forced smile. In a firm, almost metallic voice, Kira recited the list of accusations as if he read a verdict. 5 years treating me like a hindrance. Every step was a mistake, every decision of my incompetence. Bad wife, bad mother, failed. And now, miraculously, I turn gold because I inherited 4 walls. What convenient coincidence, don't you think? Elvira Radovna tried to justify himself, Balbuk. Going on something about contained affection and family needs. He spoke in a trembling voice that he had always valued her daughter-in-law, that the biggest house was a collective dream, not a price for affection. Kira heard everything in silence, with the patience of those who have decided the outcome. When the mother-in-law finished, she just replied, "Do you know one thing? I'm going to move to my grandmother's apartment. Alone. With my son." And he let the veiled suggestion be hovered, "You two can continue your romance in your room, cook." The followed scandal was epic. Elvira shouted about ingratitude, selfishness, the destruction of a family by a female whim. Daniel demanded that Kira enters her, accusing her of ruining everything for a silly offense. Until the neighbor, who until then pretended not to hear anything, disappeared with a murmur about urgent commitments. But Kira had already looked at the door of her decision. The next day she packaged her things and moved to the center. The grandmother's apartment was impeccable, well maintained until the last days of the old lady, needing only a freshness of ink and new curtains. Daniel tried the path of guilt. "Our son needs a father," he argued, as if she didn't know. "A family is not destroyed for a misunderstanding." Kira did not argue. "No one is preventing you from being a father. Or husband. But in my conditions. And without the shadow of mom dictating the rules." Elvira Radovna, however, chose the dirty war. He spread among acquaintances that the daughter-in-law, suddenly wealthy, had abandoned the family for a luxury life. He wimped to anyone who wanted to hear about how he suffered, poor mother, deprived of the grandson. A month later, Daniel appeared with his head down, swearing that he would leave his mother to save the marriage. Kira stared at him with a simple question: where were you when she humiliated me all these years? Why did her love only appear after I inherited a noble zip? He stammered something about not wanting to get into women's fights, about always loved, but the words sounded hollow. Now you don't have to choose anymore, Kira said dryly. I already chose for you. The divorce was finalized in 6 months. Elvira Radovna, stubborn, still believed in a miracle. He even knocked on Kira's door with fake tears and promises of change. But it was late. The most ironic came later. The mother-in-law realized that, besides the apartment in the center, she had also lost her grandson. Kira did not ban Daniel from seeing him, but the visits were supervised. No secret meetings with grandmother, no seeds of resentment planted in the child's head. When Elvira tried to prosecute for visiting rights, the lawyer was clear: the grandparents have rights, yes. But not when their involvement is toxic. The testimonials of neighbors and even the former aide who was in a hurry seal their destination. Daniel tried to start over. But he found that few women were to share a studio with his mother-in-law, and even less after hearing the story of the first marriage. Elvira, of course, blamed Kira for every failure of her son. A year after the divorce, a stranger approached Kira at the supermarket. I'm a friend of Elvira Radovna, he said hesitantly. She told me. Is it true that you were so cruel to her? Kira smiled, almost pity. Some people just show their faces when they think they have something to earn. 2 years later, she met Nikita. A man who loved her before he learned of the noble address. They found themselves in the library, where he programmed and she translated technical manuals. Divorced, with a daughter, Nikita understood the value of a home without conditions. When Kira told her story, he just shook his head. Confusing love with ambition is the most expensive mistake. His mother hugged Kira and her son without asking the square meter or bank statement. Elvira Radovna learned of the new relationship and tried one last blow. She called to discuss her grandson's interests. Kira was polite, but firm: about my son, miss. Oh, with his father. Not who he would use it as a bargaining chip. In the third post-divorce, Daniel married again with a co-worker. She endured 6 months living with her mother-in-law before running away, leaving a note: I won't spend your life hearing that the first wife was the demon. Elvira, now retired, devoted herself to raising her remaining son. I still blamed Kira for everything: for Daniel's loneliness, the narrow walls of the apartment, for the life that could have been perfect. Sometimes he stared at Kira outside the grandson's school, trying to talk to the boy. I miss you, my love, Coxa. Kira did not do drama. He just explained his son calmly: some people love only when they fit them. 5 years after that dinner, Kira had a solid family with Nikita. The children became brothers, the adults, a team. Daniel, reduced to his father of weekends, saw his son with a painful formality. The boy did not reject him, but felt that man had arrived too late, when there was another, a father who does not mediate love for square meters. Elvira aged bitter, living from her son's money, who now supported her with resentment. Daniel accused her for the failure of her marriages. She accused him for not being enough man to win back Kira. One day they intersected in the clinic line. Elvira, curved by time and anger, tried to speak. Kira just nodded distant. Not with hatred, but with the indifference of those who have already forgiven, but did not forget the lesson. On the way home, Kira thought of her grandmother's true legacy: not the walls, but the clarity to distinguish affection from interest. Some inheritances do not come in scripture. They come in the form of scars that teach us not to repeat the same mistakes. And that, yes, it was priceless.